1/3 November 24, 1944. Northfield, Tinian and Elliefield, Saipan. The 21st Bomber Command launches 111 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses toward the Japanese mainland. Brigadier General Wood Hansel commands the American Strategic Bombing Force from his headquarters on Guam. Silver bombers carrying 277 tons of bombs against the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashino engine plant on Tokyo's outskirts. What Japanese fighter pilots discover this morning will shatter their understanding of aerial warfare and reveal a technological gap that no amount of courage or determination can overcome. Captain Tatsuya Yamada adjusts his oxygen mask in the cockpit of his Kawasaki K-61 Hine at Chofu Airfield outside Tokyo. The morning briefing emphasized intercepting enemy bombers with maximum altitude advantage. Intelligence reports indicate large four-engine bombers operating from newly captured Mariana Islands bases flying at unprecedented heights. Yamada volunteers for the high-altitude interception mission that promises difficult combat against an enemy whose capabilities remain largely unknown. His aircraft carries four 12.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons, weapons designed for combat at conventional altitudes where Japanese fighters excelled. The altitude challenge emerged from Japan's limited experience against American heavy bombers in China during early 1944. Those B-24 Liberators and older B-7 Flying Fortresses operated at altitudes Japanese fighters could reach, typically between 20,000 and 25,000 feet. Major Tishi Meda had developed specialized climbing tactics based on those encounters, emphasizing gaining altitude before engagement rather than climbing during combat. A pilot already at altitude possessed energy advantages that could overcome defensive armament. But the morning's intelligence reports suggested these new bombers operated far higher than anything previously encountered. The 21st Bomber Command represents America's most powerful Pacific strategic deployment since the Diddle Raid of 1942. The command would eventually total over 1,000 aircraft operating from 5 major airfields across Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, with pressurized cabins designed specifically for extreme high-altitude operations over vast Pacific distances. This construction philosophy differed fundamentally from previous American bombers. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator used unpressurized crew compartments that required heavy flight suits and oxygen masks, limiting their effective operational ceiling to around 25,000 feet. American designers prioritized altitude capability in the B-29, accepting complexity in exchange for operational sanctuary above enemy interceptor range. The pressurization system allowed crews to work in shirt sleeves at altitudes where unpressurized aircraft crews would struggle with cold and hypoxia. Yamada's formation includes K-61 high-end from the 244th Century and Nakajima K-44 Shoki interceptors from the 47th Centi, climbing desperately from multiple airfields around Tokyo at maximum sustainable rate. The Japanese pilots observe contrails forming at extreme altitude where American formations approach from the southeast. Radar operators at the Chiba Detection Station identify the incoming formation at 27,000 to 31,000 feet, varying their altitude as they navigate weather conditions. Ground controllers vector defending fighters toward the threat axis, but the climbing interceptors struggle to reach even 25,000 feet before the bombers arrive, over target. The technological disparity becomes immediately apparent as opposing forces attempt engagement for the first time. Yamada flies an aircraft designed in 1941 for medium-altitude combat against Chinese and early Pacific War opposition. His Ki-61 weighs 7,650 pounds lb with a 1,175 horsepower Kawasaki HR-40 liquid-cooled engine providing 368 miles per hour maximum speed at 16,400 feet. While specifications claim a service ceiling of 36,000 feet, actual combat performance degrades severely above 28,000 feet. The engine loses power dramatically in thin atmosphere, while control surfaces become increasingly sluggish. Self-sealing fuel tanks and pilot armor had been incorporated following combat experience, adding weight that further reduced altitude performance. The Ki-44 interceptors from the 47th Centi attempt reaching the bomber formation, which varies between 27,000 and 30,000 feet altitude depending on weather conditions. These fighters, specifically designed for high-altitude interception with superior climb rates, struggle desperately in the thin atmosphere. Engines overheat while producing a fraction of their sea-level power, and pilots gasp through inadequate oxygen systems that were designed for shorter engagements at lower altitudes. The interceptors manage to reach 28,000 feet before most begin stalling, still thousands of feet below many of the bombers. Those few fighters that achieve sufficient altitude lack the energy for sustained engagement. Control surfaces barely respond in rarefied air while engines strain beyond design limits. The B-29s maintain formation integrity at their operational altitude. Crews working comfortably in pressurized compartments without the heavy flight suits or cumbersome oxygen masks that handicapped previous bomber operations. Captain Robert Morgan commands the lead superfortress Dauntless Doy as navigator Captain Theodore Vancerk identifies the primary target through the Norden bomb site. The bomber's 4 Wright 350 engines generate 2,200 horsepower each, maintaining over 300 miles per hour true air speed at operational altitude despite the thin air. Turbo superchargers compress the thin atmosphere, maintaining engine power where naturally aspirated engines fail. The pressurized compartments connect through a tunnel over the bomb bays, allowing crew movement without altitude suits. This design enables sustained operations at altitudes previously impossible for combat aircraft. The Central Fire Control System coordinates defensive armament through analog computers, tracking multiple targets simultaneously, while gunners operate from comfortable positions. Yamada pushes his K-61 to absolute ceiling, the airspeed indicator showing barely 180 miles per hour as the fighter wallows in thin atmosphere approaching 30,000 feet. His pre-war training never anticipated combat at such altitudes. The mission briefing emphasized attacking from above using diving passes to maintain energy, but reaching position above the bombers proves impossible. Japanese doctrine developed against unescorted B-17s and B-24s operating at moderate altitudes proves completely inadequate. The high-end sustains 30,000 feet for mere seconds before stalling, forcing recovery that costs 3,000 feet of altitude. Multiple attempts achieve similar results as engine temperature gauges exceed redline limits and oil pressure fluctuates dangerously. Yamada observes bomber contrails passing overhead, their defensive guns tracking his fighter but not firing due to extreme range. The altitude gulf prevents any meaningful engagement despite desperate Japanese efforts and early warning of the raid. That morning, only 40 Japanese fighters managed to make any attacks on the bomber formation, most achieving just single firing passes before losing energy. Machine gun rounds fired in climbing attacks lose velocity rapidly in thin air, many falling short of targets. The few fighters reaching effective firing position possess insufficient energy for sustained engagement, managing only brief bursts before stalling away. Anti-aircraft shells explode thousands of feet below the bombers despite maximum elevation settings on the guns. The largest Japanese anti-aircraft weapons can theoretically reach 30,000 feet, but accuracy at such altitudes proves virtually impossible. The November 24 raid marks the first mass B-29 attack on Tokyo since the symbolic Diddle raid 31 months earlier. The formation maintains course toward the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Musashino engine plant, Japan's most important aircraft engine manufacturing facility. Chief Bombardier Lieutenant Coleman releases his bombs on signal, followed by other aircraft dropping in sequence from their varying altitudes. Due to powerful jetstream winds discovered at altitude reaching over 200 miles per hour, only 24 aircraft hit the primary target with others bombing secondary targets or missing entirely. Yet the psychological impact proves profound. The bombs fall from unprecedented altitude while Japanese fighters circle helplessly below, unable to reach the attackers. Ground observers watch vapor trails crossing Tokyo's sky at previously unimaginable altitude beyond reach of defending fighters. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka coordinates fighter operations from sector control, receiving frustrated reports from interceptor squadrons. Pilots report engines failing, controls becoming ineffective, and inability to sustain altitude necessary for interception. The bombers proceed through Japanese airspace, suffering only one loss to a ramming attack by a damaged fighter in a suicidal gesture of desperation. Defending pilots expend fuel in futile climb attempts, most returning to base without ever reaching firing range. The technological superiority displayed shocks Japanese military leadership and pilots alike. The 21st Bomber Command concludes its first Tokyo mission with minimal damage from defenses, though mechanical issues force several B-29s to divert or ditch in the Pacific. Japanese fighters claim only one confirmed victory through ramming, while bomber gunners claim 5 Japanese fighters destroyed. The altitude sanctuary contradicts every Japanese expectation based on intercepting lower-flying bombers from China bases. This operational failure stems from fundamental misunderstanding of American bomber capabilities and the revolutionary nature of the B-29's design. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Gender observes B-29 operations from Naval Headquarters, analyzing Army fighter failures with growing concern. His intelligence,